West 57th Street on a late October morning in 2012 looks like a city rehearsing its own evacuation. The barriers have gone up overnight. The police tape seals both ends of the block between 6th and 7th Avenue. Not a taxi moves through it. Not a pedestrian crosses it. And suspended against the pale gray sky above the street's midpoint, 800 feet above the asphalt, a construction crane arm the length of a city transit bus has folded backward on itself at an angle that no engineered connection point was ever designed to produce. It is not swinging. It is not falling. It is simply there, bent and motionless, hanging in the exact posture of something that does not yet know it has failed. For 13 days it will remain in that position, while the city below it watches, and engineers argue, and lawyers begin drafting the documents that will eventually replace accountability with paperwork. 4 months later, in the same building beneath that crane, a penthouse will close for just over $100 million. The buyer will not be publicly named. That is not a footnote. That is the entire story. Why? The building is 157 at 157 West 57th Street, marketed as 157, designed by the Pritzker Prize-winning French architect Christian Deportes-Zompark, and developed by Extel Development Company by its founder, Gary Barnett. At 1,004 feet and 75 stories tall, it was the inaugural tower in what the city's real estate press had taken to calling Billionaires Row, the developing corridor of ultra-slender supertalls along West 57th Street, where altitude had been formally reclassified as a luxury amenity. 157 was the prototype, the first proof that Manhattan's residential market would absorb any cost, any delay, and apparently any airborne incident in exchange for the right view of Central Park. It was not just a building. It was a thesis. Hurricane Sandy tested that thesis on October 29, 2012. The crane buckled. The street closed. 2 workers were subsequently injured during the recovery operation. The developer characterized the event as a consequence of an extraordinary storm. The building sold out. It cannot be taken back. It will not be explained. This is the terrible engineering behind 157 and the 13 days that gravity spent waiting to be acknowledged. To understand what went wrong above West 57th Street, you have to understand what a luffing jib crane is designed to do in a storm. The loofing jib configuration is the preferred choice for dense urban construction precisely because of its geometry. The boom arm can be raised nearly vertical when not in active lifting use, pointing skyward and reducing the horizontal shadow cast over the surrounding streets and airspace. In a neighborhood where every cubic foot of overhead space is contested and neighboring buildings are close enough to touch, this is not a luxury. It is the difference between being permitted to build and not. But that vertical geometry creates a specific vulnerability under sustained wind loads. The protocol that mitigates this vulnerability is called free slewing. Before a major storm, the crane operator lowers the jib to a designated angle and releases the slewing brake, allowing the entire boom assembly to rotate freely in response to the wind direction rather than resist it. The crane becomes a weather vane. It finds the wind and faces it. The load is shed rather than absorbed. Picture a flag flying from a standard pole, fabric streaming in the gust, versus the same flag nailed flat to a wall with its 4 corners pinned. The flag that moves survives. The flag that cannot move is destroyed by what the moving one would have ridden out. Every experienced crane operator on a high-rise project in an urban environment understands this. The free slewing procedure is not an advanced technique. It is the first thing taught. The original sin at 157 was committed in the hours before Sandy made landfall, during the storm preparation sequence for the luffing jib crane positioned at the building's 73rd floor level. What was or was not done during that sequence became the subject of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration investigation, which extended over several months. The agency ultimately issued citations to Extel and to the crane contractor. The specific fines were a fraction of a single day's carrying cost on the project's financing. What the investigation did not produce, at least not in any public document with binding legal consequences, was a precise reconstruction of who authorized the final crane configuration, and why that configuration left the boom arm in a position to buckle rather than weather vane when the storm's peak winds arrived. Consider the anatomy of that gap. We know the crane failed. We know the failure mode, a structural connection in the luffing jib assembly buckled under wind loading, folding the outer section of the boom back toward the tower. We know this failure would not have occurred if the crane had been properly free-sleeved and its brake released. And we know, from the OSHA investigation, that the preparation was insufficient. What we do not know, in the plain language of human decision-making, is the name of the person who looked at the forecast, looked at the crane, and concluded that what was done was enough. That vacuum is not accidental. A billion-dollar project on the most photographed residential block in America can afford a great deal of organizational complexity. Organizational complexity is the most reliable solvent for individual accountability that American construction law has ever produced. Gravity does not read organizational charts. Gravity executes on the object in front of it. On the evening of October 29th, Sandy drove sustained winds into the Upper Manhattan corridor at speeds well beyond the crane's rated operating limits. The luffing jib did not weather vane. The outer section of the boom buckled at its connection point, folding backward toward the tower in a shape that structural engineers looking at the photographs recognized immediately as incompatible with any conventional lowering sequence. The folded section was hanging above West 57th Street at a height that put it beyond the reach of any ground-based crane large enough to assist. Con Edison cut power to 14 surrounding city blocks as a precaution against a falling strike on overhead lines. The New York City Police Department sealed a frozen zone around the building that severed one of Midtown Manhattan's primary crosstown arteries. Offices and schools in the potential fall radius evacuated. And then the city waited, because there was no fast solution to the problem above its head. Engineers from multiple firms had to design, from scratch, a procedure for securing a structurally compromised crane arm at 800 feet of elevation on a tower that was itself still an incomplete construction site. In the days following the storm, workers climbed into that upper structure in sustained cold and wind, attaching guide cables and restraining lines to the damaged section by hand, and anchoring the fold against further movement so that the eventual lowering sequence would not become a collapse. 13 days after Sandy's landfall, the crane came down in controlled sections. West 57th Street reopened, construction resumed. The building was delivered on schedule. So, why does this incident remain unanswered? The OSHA citations were resolved through the standard administrative process, with fines paid and the matter closed. No individual supervisor or decision-maker faced criminal exposure. The city's Department of Buildings issued no new crane preparation protocols in the storm's immediate aftermath that went materially beyond existing requirements. Gary Barnett gave interviews in which he described the incident as a consequence of an unprecedented weather event and expressed satisfaction that no fatalities had occurred. The market did not hesitate. sales at 157 continued at prices that redefined what Manhattan residential real estate was permitted to cost. The trap here is not structural, it is economic. When the asset beneath the incident is worth enough, the incident is reclassified as weather. The fines become rounding errors. The citations become administrative history. The lawyer's letter arrives, the settlement is signed, and the building opens its lobby. The accountability architecture at 157 was not designed to fail. It was designed to absorb. So what was the terrible engineering behind the 13 days 157 spent defying gravity above West 57th Street? It was not Sandy. Storms of Sandy's magnitude had struck New York before, and cranes properly prepared for them had survived intact. The failure was the belief, carried into the preparation decisions of October 28th, that a project of sufficient commercial importance was also a project of sufficient meteorological exception, that the rules applied to cranes on ordinary buildings, and that a 1,000-foot tower on Billionaire's Row occupied a different category of sky. Name the hubris. A developer who had sold the atmosphere decided that the atmosphere owed him courtesy. Name the lesson. At 1,004 feet, the wind does not know your sales price, and gravity has never once read a prospectus. 157 stands today, complete and occupied, its blue glass curtain wall catching the afternoon light above a street that shows no trace of what hung over it for nearly 2 weeks in the autumn of 2012. The penthouse residents look out over Central Park from the floors where the crane used to be. The OSHA file is closed. The citations are history. And at a specific weld point near the upper mast of the building's structural crown, there is a section of reinforced steel bracing that was not part of the original design, added during the post-incident recovery, a small mechanical scar that the glass conceals from the street below. Gravity made its argument there, at 800 feet, in October. The building answered with a check and a weld and called it even.